Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage SFA Education Director, Dr. Michael Ludes Martindale.
Good afternoon, everybody, just barely. So I'm Michael Martindale. I am the Education Director for the Space Force Association. And one of our primary missions is education and being involved in the education enterprise. And so we're very pleased this year to have an academic panel and to have very honored to have a group of educators and innovators who are going to speak to the role of academia in supporting the Space Force. And so our moderator today is Charlie Jacka, the Chief Engineer of SpaceWorks, who is a visionary leader and respected figure in the commercial exploration of national security space. Dr. Greg Autry, the Associate Provost for Space at the University of Central Florida and visiting professor at Imperial College London. He also served as the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee for the FAA. We have Dr. Melissa Patton, who is a mission-focused leader and entrepreneurial trailblazer with a proven track record in inspiring forward-thinking and innovative space products for domestic and international audiences. And Dr. Patrick Benning from the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, where he's the Mission Area Executive for National Security Space. And finally, Dr. Andy Aldrin, the CEO and President of the Aldrin Family Foundation, a charitable 501c3 organization that harnesses the inspiration of space to inspire the passion of STEAM education in students from all ages and backgrounds. And so please welcome our panel and hand it over to you, Charlie.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. I'm so excited to be surrounded by people smarter than me. That is I would say, one of my successes in my career is always to surround myself with smarter people. So I'm so excited to learn from you guys today, and hopefully the audience will learn many things from you guys as well. I'm going to start with Dr. Benning down there, actually. In light of the truth that space matters, which General Saltzman spoke to on Monday, how can Guardian Education emphasize the critical role of space in national security while preparing students for strategic decision-making for space defense?
Thanks, Charlene. So I'll also share another background that I have. I also run a master's degree in space systems engineering, and not only am I at the Applied Physics Lab. So on that point, you're asking about decision-making and critical thinking. As an engineer, I think it needs to be founded in technical understanding, and the coursework that the Guardians take and that they move through and our undergraduates take, all that needs to be founded in a technical area, in my opinion. Space is a very technical field. The understanding of how space domain operations occurs is a very technical field. How we build and operate systems is a very technical field. And so all of these decisions and all of these important matters, I think, need to be grounded in a technical understanding. And going through the undergraduate programs or even master's degree programs or even micro-credentials are all going to help that process. And that's the background that I have, and that's the background that I think folks need to be thinking about.
Great. The next question I'm going to direct to you, Dr. Aldrin. Given the increasing threats in the space domain and shift towards the warfighting focus, what sort of educational programs, traditional or otherwise, do you suggest will help prepare the future Guardians for these roles?
So let me make sure I understood. You said shift to a more financial focus.
No, sorry. Shift to a more warfighting focus. So less technical, more warfighting as a domain.
Oh,
yeah.
More warfighter based.
Yeah.
Well, so I think conflicts in the future in space are going to be decided in large part by our ability to be operationally agile. But by and large, our advantage as a nation is technological, to your point, Patrick. And so I think what's going to be most critical in the future is understanding how to manage our industrial base. And our industrial base of today is undergoing a shift that, to be honest with you, I study this thing most of my life. I have no idea what's going to happen. And so I think one of the critical aspects of it is going to be teaching students, guardians, giving them the tools to understand how to work with industry as it evolves. We're going to be moving into a model where we're going to be sharing risk with industry, and we're going to be counting on industry to deliver things not just to the warfighter, but we're also going to be relying on them to defray some of the costs of this by working with commercial industry. And that's going to be a huge challenge. And right now, you know, if what we're doing is teaching our guardians how to operate in the old system where you issue an RFP and it's got your requirements and you go meet those requirements and you're done, I don't think that's going to cut it in the future. So I think we really need to train guardians to understand the breadth of the new space ecosystem as it evolves, and to get the tools to understand what's going to happen in that industry, because nothing, in my mind, is more important than maintaining our technological edge, and that's where it's going to come from in the future.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, absolutely.
You know, so springboard off that a little bit, you know, from an education perspective, we have the world's best education institutions in America. We train the best scientists about the most important science that we do. I think it's getting time that we need to train in our educational institutions about space security. I think everybody needs to read the DIA report, Challenges to Security in Space. It is unclassified a lot of what our competitor nations are doing, and I think we need to get our undergraduate programs and our graduate programs to begin going down the math and the physics of kinetic interceptors, of RPO robotic grapplers, of electronic warfare activities, and bring it as a regular curriculum in our institutions.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's time for me to also add, but I think from that, you know, higher education perspective, it's also important for us to look at interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary opportunities. I mean, I'm probably the only one up here that's space adjacent. English degree, master's in psychology, and in a higher ed degree. But there's some space adjacency opportunities there. So when you look at it from the perspective of higher education institutions offering things like business and leadership opportunities, it's really focusing on the technical, but also on those soft skills. And those are going to be needed as we go into mission-focused opportunities.
Well, I'm sorry, I have to chime in there, so I'm going to give a counterpoint to that. I kind of disagree. I wrote in my 2010 book, Death by China, you know, if you look at World War II, who had the best technology? The Germans did, and they didn't win. It's not about having superior technology when your opponent can completely outproduce you at a scale that's almost unimaginable. And to Andy's point, you've actually taken your industrial base and handed it to them, and at the same time, you've filled your universities with your aggressor state students and are educating them essentially the same level as our students and sending them home to compete. So I don't think we win that way. We win because we have an economy and financial and capital markets that are superior to theirs. The 7th Cavalry did not win the West. The farmers, ranchers, railroads, and telegraph won the West.
Very interesting insight. I appreciate that. To continue down the countering adversarial threats, I think that, Dr. Patton, you're right. I think there's this technical skill, but there's also this soft skill needed. So with that in mind, how do we build confidence and character in our Guardian force so that they can execute this very important mission in the future?
Yeah, confidence is tremendously important. And I think that's going to come from having real world experiences at a very, very young age. I mean, if we're thinking about the now, we have to kind of backtrack, right, and get them up to skill. So by upskilling and higher education opportunities. But I think if we're looking at a younger generation, we're looking at that middle school, high school opportunity and building confidence early. We're able to do that through some really cutting edge simulation. Real life scenarios enable us to be ready for real world situations. And I think that happens within the educational umbrella. I think that builds the confidence, it gets us ready, and it helps us take care of what we need to do on the next level.
Can any of you, I'm going to let other panelists chime in, can any of you present any opportunities to maybe those students who are not yet into their higher education, but might be in the K through 12 STEM area?
I definitely can add some insight to that and piggyback off of what I was saying. I think in the K through 12 space, which is a space that I'm pretty familiar with in helping students connect, have access, especially underserved, underrepresented students. I'm working with a customer right now at our firm who is looking for educational technology products that simulate different opportunities in space. And those children at that young age having access are not only understanding, okay, who I am in STEM, but they're also understanding that I can be a part of this. I belong in space. And that helps them as they move forward in their education career, but then also as they begin to form who they are and what they want to do when they grow up, hypothetically. So I think integrating educational technology products and simulations as early as middle school and high school, I think that's really going to help us understand what their skill sets are and how they're going to be able to move forward.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I actually chose a STEM career because of Andy's dad, right? So I was 6 years old when Buzz and Neil went to the moon, and a lot of people my age made that choice, and we had a big bubble of folks who ended up going into the software and PC industry to a great extent, but they were inspired by that, and we should never forget that. When I was at NASA during the last transition team in 2016, one of the decisions we made was to shut down their Office of Education. And people were like, oh, that's crazy. You won't be able to inspire students with that. Well, if NASA actually goes out and does things, instead of delaying things and being risk averse, they'll inspire a whole new generation of students. They can't hire a bunch of people to give out computer labs and tablets and inspire students if they're not actually doing something. Space Force, I think, is a great opportunity to inspire young people because something's actually happening, and for them to see that there's people who look and have histories like them doing great things.
You know, we talk about the commercial revolution in space. We talk about the military technical revolution in space. I think one of the real revolutions, and maybe the most important one, is that we're moving from an environment in which we all watch. Like when my dad went to the moon, 2 people landed on the moon, 1 guy got stuck orbiting the moon. Greatest hero in the world as far as I'm concerned, Mike Collins. 100,000 or so worked on it, and then 300 million watched. Today, we flipped that script, and kids in any school can actually work in space. We've got, with the foundation, we're funding programs where kids are literally playing around on the moon and Mars. Kids get inspired by 2 things, dinosaurs in space. They get over dinosaurs, they don't get over space. But beyond that, if you look out in a classroom today, we've got kids in high schools, programs that we're running building satellites. We've got kids in junior highs. We don't actually fund any with the foundation yet, but we've got kids in junior high building satellites. Okay, this is incredible. If you look out in a classroom today, there is a kid sitting in a class, probably in 1st grade. Greg might think they're in 7th grade or something, but I'm going to go with 1st grade. The first Martian is sitting in a classroom in America today, right? There are kids sitting in classrooms today that are going to apply for jobs on the moon. And it's not going to be as an astronaut. I had one kid come up to me and said, I want to be a barista on the moon. That's crazy, right?
Do it.
But if you think about it, now think about this. You look at the edge of a crater that's sitting on one of the poles. On one side of the edge of the crater, you're looking at the Earth all of the time, right? And you're in light. On the other side of the edge of the crater, you could have a tunnel between the two. You got a restaurant that's actually looking at the darkest part of space you could be looking at it because it's never in sunlight. The best background for stars. If there's any place that needs a barista, it's the hotel right there. And so what we're looking at is an opportunity to inspire kids, underserved kids primarily, that they can be a part of space. And so, you know, that's really about space for education. But as they grow up, a lot of those kids are going to go off and be entrepreneurs, computer programs, what have you. Some of them are going to come into the workforce. But I think we got to start with getting kids excited about it and realizing that they can actually do something in space. One of the things we do with our research at the foundation is we measure student and teacher self-efficacy. And we're looking at 50% improvements over the course of a semester. And so that's pretty impressive. And I think we need to build off of that. And I think the starting point is getting kids today to believe that they can be a part of space. And that's just something which is fundamentally different from the past.
And you started talking about technologies, and Charlie, you bring in the how do we help the Space Force, think about tackling their overwhelming mission objectives. The thing that I would put in your minds and what we need to begin talking about, if you don't have a ChatGPT account, if you're not using these large learning models to help your daily workflow, their overwhelming mission objectives can be made easier through those technologies. And I think that's a part of the workforce development that we need to put into the Guardians, into the civilian workforce, and also into the Pentagon. We need to get those tools into the hands of the military, put them on all of our classified networks, and train all of our operators and Guardians on how to use them for their daily workflow, not just to help them make decisions, but to help them manage all the information that's coming, all the difficulties that they've got to deal with. These tools are here now, and if you're not using them, you're being left behind.
That's all great insight. And I think what's coming to mind to me right now is, we're going through this huge shift in space, right? We've gone from few state actors to just massive proliferation, and you kind of pointed to this, Dr. Autry. And so, as we go through this shift, we have to educate our Guardians on how to think differently. And so, what are some key points that you think we should be educating our Guardians on to win the next war, which includes the space domain?
Well, as I mentioned, I think that it was the railroads and the farmers and the ranchers that won. Now, what the role of the Space Force is, and I think the new mission statement that Salty came out with really hits that, is to make sure that economic development can happen. So they need to be contextually aware of it. They're not there to fight a war against China or something. They're there to make sure that our commercial development beats the Chinese, right? If we actually end up in a kinetic conflict in space, I think it might be game over for space. And we don't want to go there. But their job is peace through strength, and to realize that it's the commercial sector that they're enabling, and not just by protecting it, but by using the resources of the commercial sector and building the supply chain that we need, not just for Space Force, but for exploration and for eventual space development and settlement, because they're the anchor customer. And that's really important. So,
I think they need to know that they have so much potential. I mean, it's wide open. And with one of the newest branches, there's so much potential. And I think that potential can start early. I think that can start as being a buddy or being a mentor in the K through 12 space. I think it's helping kids understand that ROTC is a really great opportunity for you to be what I am. Kids look up to people in industry, within that space industry. So I think that there's a lot of potential there to help them understand that if we want to grow the Space Force, we can do that, but we have to be visible, and we have to be a hero, and we have to be insightful, and we have to engage, and we have to show diversity. And I think those things definitely need to be known. Space Force is special, and people need to know that early.
I love it. I'm a Space Force zealot. I would have loved to have been in the Space Force. And one of the things, that I'd like to springboard off of your inspiration is to inspire, to help the Guardians, we need to inspire the American public.
Yes.
And then we need to inspire them about what is really going on in the competition in space. I love what Major General Gagnon is doing, the Space Force S2. He is writing a quarterly unclassified report about what the Space Force is able to talk about that the competitor nations are doing, that our Guardians are challenged with now as we try to continue our ability to project power through space activities. What I'd like to see is that go even farther. The Space Force and Space Command both have academic partnership activities going on with lots of universities. I think they should be making seminars and recording videos regarding what our competitor activities are doing and describing this so that it can inspire the people who want to help the Guardians and defend our way of life and our country to get motivated to come do military activities in space, which we need to do.
So with the Guardians, we're in a really wonderful point at which it's a new force. They've got a clean slate to work with. They're in some ways blessed by resource constraints because they don't really have the money to go create an academy. And so they've got to figure out how to work differently and more creatively. And if you look back at military innovation, a lot of it happens as you create new organizations, and a new organization has just tremendous flexibility. So I love what I'm seeing with the Space Force right now. They're really in a process, particularly with education, of just trying to figure out what the new model is. And so I'm super excited about all of the potential, and I think, you know, they need to spend time figuring out how to get this right, because they've got an opportunity that's just different from anyone else. As I said, the environment we face, not just internationally, but domestically, is so dramatically different than it has been, I think, for any other industry.
Great. Just from my personal experience, I've spent a lot of time in joint exercises and military exercises, and you know, it's interesting because when I'm in those exercises, usually I'm sitting next to a Marine or an Army person, and they're like, space? Like, we didn't even know space existed. What can you do for me, right? Like, how can you help in this joint fight? And so I'm curious from each of you, what is maybe that one game-changing idea or technology that space can really bring to the next joint fight?
I'm having trouble picking one. One of the things I like, though, is space-based solar power for specific directed missions, not the really big space solar power thing that's going to power Los Angeles, but a mobile platform that can provide power to operational theaters where you might be doing a rescue operation, or you might be doing a military operation. You might have a small group of people in a remote area who need power that can move a little bit. I think that's exciting.
I'll weigh in on here. If the one technology that I think can be game-changing, it's quite a ways away, is nuclear technologies as applied to defensive space activities. It's a way for us to do sustained space operations, which we need to do, and it is going to come. Refueling is a potential one way to solve that problem, but if you get fission reactors to be able to do thermal propulsion capability, of a lot more capability and a lot more delta V you could bring to the problem than just refueling can happen. I think there's ways also for space power through nuclear technologies as well that we might need, instead of having solar arrays that happen to be sticking out and protruding. There's useful and interesting technology ideas and defense ideas to use those activities. So if I were to just pick one technology that wasn't AI ML, I would go down that path.
Has to be AI, doesn't it? So I think it's less a technology, it's a mode of operations. I think the other revolution which could happen, we're not there, but it's really the development of a complete infrastructure in space where you have delivery to points in space. Maybe that's Starship. Maybe that's the one place, frankly, that Starship makes sense. But then you've got to have mobility systems that are moving things around. I think the idea of ultimately being able to get resources from someplace other than the Earth, which is a real struggle. And basically, I agree with what Greg wrote recently. It's probably going to come from the moon if we can make sense out of it. But I think as this new infrastructure evolves, we will figure out ways of using space that we're not even thinking of right now. And so I think, I can't tell you what it's going to lead to. Mm-hmm. Nuclear technology is probably a huge part of it, because that just gives you sort of unlimited mobility. But I think the revolutionary technology is going to be sort of a revolution in space infrastructure, and it's going to take a while.
Right. As a tech innovator in Space Force, you know, I often work with academic institutions all the way to the industrial base. And so one thing I think that we could work on is better partnerships with academia. And I would love each of you to comment on what Space Force Guardians or Space Force in general could do to better work with academic institutions so that we can bring not only the best education, but also the best technology forward for our Guardians.
Well, I just want to say I think they're actually doing a great job. I want to start with that. Say Space Force is connecting in a way that is timely, relevant, and moving at light speed compared to other branches of the U.S. government in making these educational connections. My university, University of Central Florida, has got several things going on. We just got a proposal to Patrick to do some education there that I heard was accepted, so I'm excited about that. We're working with other groups, and it's happening rapidly and responsively, and they're telling us very practically exactly what they need so that we can adapt to delivering a value for the Guardians and for the civilian workers in the Space Force. So I'm just going to give you kudos.
Awesome, thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd really have to echo what Dr. Autry said. There's some really innovative things happening with the Space Force, and again, you know, kind of breaking down those silos and realizing that there's so much opportunity to cross-collaborate. But I think one of the areas that is the most beneficial, that always has room for improvement, is co-creating on curriculum. Between industry, between Space Force, and between organizations and educational technology companies. I think when you are able to use that three-strand approach, you, going back to what I was saying about the realism and the immersion and opportunities to have confidence in what we're doing when we're in mission-sensitive situations, I think that enables it. I think out of that comes internships and incubators and mock opportunities to practice and try things out in real life situations. So I think all of those will provide capabilities that are just going to be game changing.
Yeah, I want to underscore that, what she said about industry and academia and the Space Force working together to define the curriculum instead of academia saying, here's our list of courses, deal with it, right?
Right.
So important.
Yeah, I'd add one thing onto this. I think the Space Force and academic institutions need to be looking beyond degreed, credentialed courses.
Yes.
And it's not just academics. There's a lot of innovation going on in the industry to provide micro courses and those type of things to upscale everybody's understanding of what's going on in the space domain. You know, at Hopkins, we're doing that. We're beginning to take a lot of our master's degree courses that people don't want to go spend a couple of years and take 10 courses and 14 weeks for each of them to try to find a way to package them into digestible 1 or 3 day programs that then can be offered as not an actual credential, but as credit for those type of activities. And industry is doing the same thing. So I think the Space Force needs to be thinking about using not just academic institutions for the degree granting purposes, but also for these credentials to try to get bite-sized nuggets to upgrade the skills of everybody.
So when Mike introduced me, he talked about one of my day jobs, which is running the Family Foundation, which is great, and that's mostly K through 12. My other day job that probably has more to do with me talking to the rest of you is I run a couple of programs at Embry-Riddle University. They are asynchronous online programs, and we have 2 programs. One is a sort of interdisciplinary program looking at the whole space infrastructure. Another one is more program management oriented. But what I'm getting to is kind of, it's a technology, it's a mode of delivery, but asynchronous education done right, one, it's really hard for teachers, it's really hard for course developers. It's really hard for students because you've got to work on it every week. You don't get to sort of cruise for a week and hope you can kind of sit through the seminar. The thing that's most important, though, is the work that we get out of students is, for the top 20% of students, the best I've ever seen, because they have to work at something every day. So this is kind of a mode of delivery. The beauty of it is, so I developed, for the program, we've got 20 courses. I've developed all 10 for the first program, 6 of the 10 for the second program. But we can slice and dice each one of these lectures into any kind of format you want. So if somebody wants a week-long program, you can mix it with some face-to-face, add asynchronous to provide kind of a foundation. But I think as we look to the future of more flexible education, asynchronous online isn't going to be the answer for everyone for all things. But it is an incredible tool if it's done right. And so I think we need to build that into the future. Because one of the beauties of it is, if you're doing something asynchronous, for each one of my weekly modules, I'll tape a lecture. But I can bring in experts to tape lectures for an hour or so, slice and dice that across 4 different courses in different ways, and that's a permanent thing. And we're just, I think, starting to scrape the surface of what we can do with this technology. And I think that has to be part of the future of space education, or probably education in general.
Great. I'm going to see if anybody wants to ask a question from the audience. It's a light crowd, and I know we're in the last group. No? Okay, so last question. As we wrap up here, you know, to me, in space, we're moving and evolving from not just being technically savvy and SMEs, if you will, to one where we're blossoming into this economy. And so with that there's a lot of leaning forward into leadership. And so I would say in my career, not every engineer or physicist is meant to be a leader. Or maybe we'll freely step into that. And maybe it's the right way to say that. And so what are you guys doing on the educational side to not only build the technical knowledge, but also building future leaders for our future force?
Great. That's been my career, actually, teaching technology, leadership, and entrepreneurship. And then I was at Thunderbird School of Global Management, where I launched basically the first space MBA. That was a degree program for space leaders, and I'll be doing the same at UCF. That is so important because you get these scientists, PIs, that get pushed up, and all of a sudden they're running a huge program with maybe over $1 billion worth of NASA money or something, or in Space Force, quite a bit of money, and they have no finance skills, they have no leadership skills, they have no negotiation skills, and you need to have all these things. So I think it's so important that people realize, I think that the strongest educational background you can have is an engineering degree, preferably maybe a 4+1 bachelor's and master's in some engineering and an MBA together. But you've got to have, in my opinion, an MBA that is savvy to the domain we're in. So I'm excited to be building a space-specific MBA program that hopefully you'll see coming out at UCF shortly.
I think, I have to come from a different perspective because I know that we're in the now, but we also have to look at the future. There's this race for 2030, but there's also 2040, 2050, 2060. And one of the things that I've been a part of, which was incredibly impactful, but also forward-thinking, was being able to connect in order to reach underserved, underrepresented groups, and able to provide that access, providing STEM and STEAM opportunities connected to physical literacy and sports. Sports is it's a common denominator for everything. It connects everybody together, regardless to race, ethnicity, et cetera. So being able to connect the two together, increase opportunities for minorities to be a part of the program, but also we instituted life skills. So within that, we were able to talk to them about confidence, self-esteem, leadership, not necessarily the things before your time that people were connecting to engineer programs and STEM-based programs. So I think that we have to be intentional with the integration points. And then we have to ask the question, is everybody meant to be a leader? And that's the $50 question, right? Some of us follow and some of us lead, but we have to enhance those leadership capabilities and teach people to follow well. And I think that can happen, but it needs to start early as we focus on the now.
Your question reminds me of a saying I heard once where a welder gets promoted to be the manager of welders and he thinks he needs to weld more. And that's just not the way it rolls. So what am I doing specifically in the things that I'm involved in? So in our master's degree, it's a technically focused degree. We have 43 courses, 600 students on the technical activities for space systems engineering. Separately, the Whiting School offers a master's degree in engineering management for folks that want to go down that path. But specifically in our program, what are we doing to develop leaders? Many of our courses are project-based, and so they get teamed up with folks and have to work through technical aspects and the delivery of the workload and the separation of the workload, and usually somebody in there becomes the driving force because they want to get a good grade. And so I think a lot of the teaming aspects that we do in the program that I run, at least, helps folks to get the skills to become leaders, to learn dynamics, to understand how to work with people, how to overcome an underperforming individual. They self-grade each other in terms of their performance. And so it gets those pieces in there while it's focused around something very technical related to space systems development.
So I think leadership begins with curiosity. And what we do with the foundation is we teach kids to be curious. It's project-based learning. And so they're learning how to ask questions. In the graduate programs that I run, we teach students, these are mostly mid-career. In fact, at Embry-Riddle overall, half of our student population is active or retired military. I'm not that high in our program, so we're looking for more guardians, please, because my numbers look bad for that. Overall, they look great. But I think, I think the military does a great job of training officers and non-commissioned officers to be great leaders. I mean, I actually think that's something they do really well. What we're trying to do is train them to ask the right questions, because you can't get the right answer if you're asking the wrong question. And sometimes in the military, I realize this may come as a shock, sometimes we don't ask the right questions. And I think that's what I'm trying to do in the graduate program, is pound it into their heads that you got to figure out what really matters. And so I think that's a foundation for leadership. We really don't at the graduate level, and the programs I've developed have specific leadership modules. I think it's incredibly important, but I'm not sure that online education is the right way to do that kind of development.
Great. I appreciate all of you being here with me today, and also to the audience for sticking it out to the very end here. Thank you for your time.
So, whether you're going to be an astronaut, a guardian, or a lunar barista, you're going to have a solid educational foundation. So let's thank these educational leaders and innovators for their time today.